When convicted killer Michael Madison stood before a judge to receive his fate, everyone expected some level of remorse. Instead, Madison smirked, laughed, and even rolled his eyes as the victim's family gave their emotional statements. But what happened next left the entire courtroom stunned. The father of one of Madison's victims lunged at him, furious that the man who murdered his daughter had the audacity to mock their pain. Security rushed in, tackling the grieving father before he could reach Madison. It was a moment that showed just how raw and emotional justice can be. Judges are supposed to be the most level-headed people in the courtroom. But Judge John Murphy in Florida proved that even the bench isn't immune to losing control. When a public defender repeatedly challenged his ruling, Murphy snapped. He shouted, "If you want to fight, let's go out back right now," before storming out of the courtroom. Shockingly, the lawyer followed him, and court officers later heard sounds of a physical altercation. The judge was later suspended, proving that even those upholding the law can have explosive tempers. Few criminals enjoy attention as much as Rodney Alcala, a convicted serial killer who represented himself in court. What made it bizarre? Alcala, who was accused of brutal murders, decided to play both lawyer and witness. He asked himself questions in the third person, then dramatically answered them in a completely different voice. It was as if he were putting on a one-man show. Despite his antics, the jury wasn't amused. He was sentenced to death, but not before giving one of the strangest self-defense performances in legal history. Some defendants will say anything to avoid responsibility. But Atilano Dominguez took it to another level. When faced with serious assault charges, he didn't deny his crimes. Instead, he claimed that he was possessed by a demon at the time. Dominguez insisted that an evil spirit took over his body and made him commit the crime. His defense? An exorcism expert who testified that demons are real. The jury didn't buy it, and he was sentenced to 25 years behind bars. Imagine being on trial for armed robbery and thinking, now's a great time to propose. That's exactly what happened when defendant Jason Hines suddenly turned to his girlfriend, who was in the audience, and asked her to marry him. The judge, the jury, even his own lawyer were caught off guard. The best part? His girlfriend actually said yes. But the judge wasn't moved by the romance. Hines was sentenced to 15 years in prison, meaning their honeymoon would have to wait. Courtrooms require a certain level of decorum, but defense attorney John Marshall clearly missed that memo. During a high-profile case, Marshall stumbled into court, slurring his words and struggling to stay awake. When the judge demanded to know what was wrong, he finally admitted. He was under the influence of drugs. The courtroom gasped. His client's case was immediately declared a mistrial, and Marshall was arrested on the spot. Yes, you read that right. In one of the strangest legal cases ever, a man named Robert Lee Brock decided to sue himself. His reason? He claimed that by committing a crime, he had violated his own civil rights and deserved compensation. His logic was that since he was in prison and couldn't work, he should be awarded money from, well, himself. The judge dismissed the case, but not before calling it the most ridiculous lawsuit in history. Courtrooms have strict security, but that didn't stop Nicholas Garrison from attempting the boldest escape ever. While waiting for his sentencing, he suddenly leaped over the jury box, sprinted across the room, and darted out the door. Court officers chased him through the courthouse, but he managed to jump out a second-story window and escape into the streets. His freedom didn't last long. Police caught him hours later, hiding in a dumpster. Some defendants tried to play the insanity card, but Charles Helms took it to a new level. Accused of multiple fraud schemes, Helms defended himself by claiming he was a time traveler from the year 2095 and that none of his crimes should count because they hadn't happened yet. He even demanded the judge check his fingerprints against future government records. Unsurprisingly, the court didn't buy it. He was sentenced to 10 years for fraud, with no time travel loophole to save him. You expect to see legal arguments in court, not loaded weapons. But Judge Tracy Hunter shocked the courtroom when, in the middle of a heated trial, she pulled out a gun and placed it on her desk. The reason? She claimed she was feeling threatened by a lawyer's aggressive questioning. The entire room froze. Although she didn't fire, she was immediately removed from the case and later barred from practicing law. Jury duty is serious business. You're deciding someone's fate. But one juror in California had other priorities. Throughout the trial, they were seen glued to their phone, swiping and tapping. It wasn't until the judge directly asked them what they were doing that they casually admitted, "Candy Crush, Your Honor." The courtroom burst into laughter, but the judge was furious. The juror was dismissed immediately, and the trial had to restart with a new jury. Some people just don't know when to stop talking. During a robbery trial, a witness was called to testify against the accused, but while answering questions, he slipped up and said, "When we robbed the store," before catching himself. The courtroom went dead silent. The prosecutor immediately stopped and asked the judge for a recess. Within hours, the witness was arrested for being an unintended accomplice. Courtrooms are known for heated arguments, but one judge took an unusual approach to keeping things in order. When defense attorney Franklin Williams kept interrupting the proceedings, the judge gave him multiple warnings. But Williams refused to stop talking over everyone, so the judge ordered the bailiff to duct tape his mouth shut. The surreal moment had the courtroom staring in disbelief as Williams sat silent, fuming, and literally taped up. Some people have strange superstitions, but in a Nigerian courtroom, a woman showed up with a live goat, claiming it was the spirit of the man she was suing. According to her, the defendant had used black magic to transform himself into an animal and avoid facing justice. The judge, struggling to keep a straight face, had both the woman and the goat removed before continuing the trial. When accused thief Frank Gonzalez was asked by the judge if he understood his charges, he didn't respond with words. Instead, he got down on all fours and started barking like a dog. The judge tried to regain control, but Gonzalez refused to stop howling. When officers finally restrained him, he claimed he was possessed by a spirit animal. The jury wasn't convinced. He was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. There's eccentric, and then there's full-on Gotham villain. When Jerome Jones was brought to trial for multiple assault charges, he arrived dressed as the Joker. Face paint, green hair, purple suit, everything. He even laughed maniacally during witness testimony, freaking out the entire courtroom. His stunt didn't work. He was convicted within the hour. Defending a client can be stressful, but in one case, it became too much to handle. During a tense murder trial, the defense attorney suddenly collapsed in the middle of his argument. Gasps filled the room as paramedics rushed in. Luckily, he recovered quickly, but the trial had to be postponed. The reason? He hadn't eaten for 24 hours straight due to stress. Most people react to prison time with shock or tears, but Charles Turner decided to celebrate. The moment the judge announced his 10-year sentence, Turner stood up and started dancing. He swayed, snapped his fingers, and even did a little moonwalk. When asked what he was doing, he simply said, "Might as well enjoy it." Justice is about logic and fairness, unless you're Judge Michael Cicconetti. Known for creative sentencing, Cicconetti once shocked a courtroom by pulling out a magic 8-ball and shaking it to determine if a teenager should get jail time. When questioned, he shrugged and said, "It's just for fun." While the ruling wasn't based on it, people left wondering if he'd done it before. Stenographers are responsible for recording every word spoken in court. But one in New York got so bored with a long trial that he stopped typing real words and instead wrote blah 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 over and over again. The worst part? No one noticed until they checked the official transcript weeks later. By then, half the trial's records were useless. Courtrooms are meant to be places of justice, but as you've seen, reality is sometimes stranger than fiction. From dancing convicts to laughing murderers, these bizarre cases prove that no trial is ever predictable. But what do you think? Which courtroom moment shocked you the most? Drop a comment below And if you want more crazy crime stories, subscribe to Crime Chronicles.